Okay, I understand it now. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Justice. Today we're going to be solving Leetcode number 1462, course schedule 4, which is the Leetcode problem of the day. So let's get into it. So there are a total number of num courses you have to take, labeled from 0 to num courses minus 1. We're given a prerequisites array where the prerequisite I represents A, I, B, indicates that you must take course A first if you want to take course B. So for example, if we have the pair 0, 1, this indicates that we have to take course 0 before we can take course 1. Okay, so prerequisites can also be indirect. If course A is a prerequisite of course B, and course B is a prerequisite of course C, then that means that course A is also a prerequisite of course C. Okay, so we're also given an array queries where queries UV is going to be for the jth query. We're going to answer whether the course U is a prerequisite of course V. So we're going to return a Boolean array answer, and this answer is going to store the answer for the jth query. Okay, so let's give an example here. So in example number 1 here, we're going to have a prerequisite array like this, which indicates that course 1 is going to be a prerequisite of course 0, and that's all that's given to us in our prerequisites array. And then we're given 2 queries to test this theory on. So we're given a query that asks us, okay, can we actually, is course 0 a prerequisite of course 1? And then we have another one here that says, is course 1 a prerequisite of course 0? As we can see here, this is going to return to false and true in this output, because when we can look at the course 0, 1 here, so the first answer in the jth query, we can say, okay, is course 0 a prerequisite of course 1? As we can see, no, this is a directed graph that we have here, and course 0 actually does not have an edge pointing to course 1. So we know that that's false. So this part of the query returns is not true, so we output that as false, and we move on. And then it asks us the second question, is course 1 a prerequisite of course 0? We look at the edges of course 1, and we can see course 1 has a directed edge to course 0. So we know that course 1 is actually a prerequisite of course 0 from our prerequisites array. So this is true, so then we just output true, and then our output here is going to be false for the first answer in the jth query, and then true for the second answer in the jth query. Okay, so now let's get to example number 2. We have 2 courses. We see our prerequisites array is empty, so that means that we do not have any prerequisites, and each course is going to be independent. So since there's no prerequisites in our prerequisite array, it's going to be asking, the queries array is always going to be asking us whether one course is a prerequisite of another, so we know we're always going to have false here. Because in this case, it's asking us if course 1 is a prerequisite of course 0, but as we can see in our prerequisites array, there's no courses that's a prerequisite of another. Each course is on its independent state, so there is going to be no correct answers. And then in this last example 3 here, we have 3 courses. We have a prerequisites array, so we have 1 pointing to 2. We have 1 also being a prerequisite of course 0, and then we have course 2 being a prerequisite of course 0 as well. First question is going to ask us, is course 1 a prerequisite of course 0? We can look at course 1, and we need to look at all of its prerequisites. So we see course 1, and we see that one of its prerequisites is of course 0. So 1 is a prerequisite of course 0. That is good, so that is true. And then it's also asking us if 1 is a prerequisite of course 2, so we look at 1, and then we look at 1's prerequisites, and then we see that the prerequisite is actually 2, so we know that 1 is directly a prerequisite of course 2. Okay, so how are we going to solve this and go through this? So I'm going to draw an explanation of how we're going to do this in the next example here, and we're going to walk through this step by step with drawings. Okay, so let's take a look at this example here. So we're going to have 4 courses, and we're going to have prerequisites of course 1 pointing to course 0. So course 1 is going to be a prerequisite of course 0, so let's write that out. 1 here is going to be a prerequisite prerequisite to course 0. So let's build out that graph. And then we're going to have 2 being a prerequisite of course 0 as well. So 2 is a prerequisite of course 0. Sorry, my drawing's bad. And then we're going to have 3 being a prerequisite of course 1. So 3 here is going to be a prerequisite of course 1. Okay, so now we're going to be checking all the query conditions and seeing if it returns true or false. So let's say the first query here, so it's going to be asking us, is 0 a prerequisite of 1? So we're going to check 0, and we're going to say, hey, is 0 a prerequisite of 1? We look at 0 and all of 0's prerequisites. So in this graph, as we've seen, 0 has actually no prerequisites. So actually 1 is a prerequisite of 0, but 0 is not a prerequisite of 1. So this is not going to return true. As you can see in this example here, it's actually going to be false. So we're going to be building up that result array, and we're going to start off with false. But I'll just start with F here just so we can make things a lot quicker. So this is going to be false, doesn't evaluate to true. Now we're going to check the second condition in the query. So here it's going to say, is 1 a prerequisite of 0? So we look at 1 here and we look at all of 1's prerequisites. So 1 has a prerequisite directly to course 0. So it's a direct prerequisite of course 0. So we know that that is going to evaluate to true because we look at course 1 and we see that it points to course 0, so it's direct. So that's going to evaluate to true in that case. We're going to keep building up our result array. Now it's going to ask us, is 2 a prerequisite of 0? So we look at 2 and we see that 2 has a directed edge pointing to course 0. So we know that 2 is a direct prerequisite to course 0. So we know that that's going to evaluate to true as well. So let's write that down, and then we're going to be updating our results output. And then let's say, okay, now it's going to ask us, is 3 prerequisite of course 0? So first we're going to look at course 3 and we see its prerequisite. So we see course 3, we go, its prerequisite is course 1. So is course 1 a prerequisite of course 0? As you can see here, we've actually already computed that result. So we'll probably benefit by using some sort of cache to memorize these results. So we can have a cache as we go through these queries. So we know that 0, 1 is going to be false. So we're going to say 0, 1 is going to be false. And then etc. We're going to say, we already know that 1, 0 is true, etc., etc. We know 2, 0 is true. So here we're going to say, okay, we're going to see the prerequisites of 1, and we're going to say, is 1 a prerequisite of that target 0? We look at 1 and we know that it's true from our cache. So we know that 3 is a prerequisite of 0, but it's an indirect prerequisite of 0. Because when we go from 3, we look at 3's prerequisite. So we see that 3's prerequisite is course 1, and course 1 has a direct prerequisite to course 0. So that makes 3 an indirect prerequisite to course 0, as stated in our example. So that is true. Now we look at 3 and 1, and we're going to also add that to our cache. But now we're going to look at 3 and 1 and say, okay, is 3 a prerequisite of course 1? We look at 3, we look at 3's prerequisites. So we see 3's prerequisites, and we see that that actually does have a prerequisite that points directly to course 1. So 3 is directly a prerequisite to course 1. And then we're going to update true. And we have no more results in our queries. So this is what we're going to return in our output, false, with all the rest being true for the different queries. And that's kind of how we're going to go through it. So I'm going to show you how we're going to go through this with depth first search and memoization within the code, and it's going to make a lot more sense. But I hope this example and walkthrough cleared a lot of things up for you, and how we can find if a course is a certain prerequisite by just doing the depth first search on all of its prerequisites and seeing if it can get to any target that we have here. Yeah, so it's going to make a lot more sense in the code, so let's jump into that next. Okay, so let's start off with the code here. So we're going to start off with a prerequisite map. Like we said, it's going to be built from the number of courses. So we're going to say I courses. So for each course in our number of courses that we have, we're going to populate it with all of its prerequisites. So let's do that now. So for course prerequisites in our prerequisites, we're going to be adding each course's prerequisite to our prerequisite map. Append prerequisites. Cool. We also need a cache to cache the results. We also need a helper function for our depth first search to check if we can actually get to a specific target from the query based on the course, but we're going to write that out later. We're going to write that out later. And then we're going to be returning an output, but we're going to build that output by calling the depth first search function with the specific course and target based on our query. So we have a queries array here that's going to have the answer for the specific day. So for each specific course and target in this query, we're going to be calling our depth first search function to check if we can if that course is a prerequisite of our target. So what are we going to do first? We have a cache, so we know if we have a cache result, we can just return that. So we're going to say if the specific course and the target values has already been computed. So if it's in our cache, we're just going to return whatever value we have cached in our cache. Target. We're also going to be saying a base condition if the course is being checked if it's a prerequisite of itself. We know that that's true. So let's say, for example, if we have course of 0 and we want to see if course of 0 is a prerequisite of course of 0, we know that that's always going to return true. So we're just going to return true. Otherwise, we're going to be checking every prerequisite for the specific course that's given in our prerequisite map course. And we're going to see if any of them can lead us to that target. So if DFS, and we're going to say the prerequisite and the target, and we know that we have a solution. So we can say, okay, we can say the cache for that course and the target is going to be true. We can add that to our cache, and then we can return true. Otherwise, we've broken through and we've checked through all the prerequisites for the specific course, and none of them was able to get to our target. So it's not an indirect or direct prerequisite to our target. So we know we can never get there. So we're going to update our cache to reflect that. So we're going to say cache from course to target is false, and then we're going to return false. And that is it. So this is pretty intuitive, pretty quick. It just takes some caching and some prerequisite map that we needed to build, and then we can just check all the prerequisites to see if any of them can go to our target. Here is going to be the output result here that's going to be built off of each course and target in our query. We're going to run that. So that's good. And it's pretty clean here. 300 milliseconds, so that's pretty quick. Let's go through time and space complexity next. So time and complexity is going to be it's going to be O of V plus E. V plus E is vertices and edges that we have in our graph. V is going to be the number of courses, and E is the number of prerequisites. And then we're going to have that be multiplied by Q. Q being the number of queries. Because for each query, we're going to be visiting all of the prerequisites for the course, so we can at most visit all of that. So it's going to be going through all the vertices and edges in the graph for the query. So it's going to be V plus E times Q. And then space complexity here is going to be O of vertices and the edges and the queries. This is because here we have a pre-map. That pre-map is going to be built to have all the vertices and edges, which is the courses and prerequisites. And then we also have this cache here that has all the query results here. So it's going to have the query results in our recursive stack. So it's going to be VE plus Q. Yep. So feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing a lot of more Leetcode problems. I do Leetcode problems daily here. So yeah, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.